While most people know James Rolfe as the angry video game nerd, I've always found him to be a fascinating independent filmmaker. He grew up in a time where he was forced to edit his own movies on VHS, and didn't have the luxury of using top-of-the-line computers, cameras, and editing software. As a result, you get some really scrappy short films that can tell us a lot about who James is as a person and as a creative.
It's just like in every horror movie. Just when you think the thing is dead, it comes back one more time. But you know what? I'm not afraid of you.
That being said, though, his filmography is very confusing. He claims to have made over 500 movies, but when you actually look at the list, the vast majority of them are just AVGN episodes or random YouTube videos. I think most people consider these to just be YouTube videos as opposed to a proper film and a filmography, but semantics aside, I wanted to take a look at James's filmography from a more streamlined approach. So today I'll be exclusively covering some of his short films. Without wasting any more time, let's get into a pretty pointless video essay where I overanalyze the films of James Rolfe. The Six Snix Flix are a collection of short films by James that he made during his adolescence, with the last installment being finished when he was 18 years old. Looking at the Six Snix Flix themselves, the narrative arc is a very simple premise involving an ancient warlock returning to possess the living, but with the way that these films are structured, it becomes more complex as it progresses along. James describes the series as the longest-running Cinemassacre project prior to The Nerd, serving as a documented transition from childhood hobbyism to a more structured approach to filmmaking. You could tell a lot of hard work went into making these movies, and it's very clear why, even as a full-grown adult, he is so damn proud of them. James treats the progression of the series as a metaphor for the accelerating pace of life, specifically through the recurring gag where the intervals of the warlock's return shorten with every sequel. So in between the first movie and the second movie, the warlock doesn't come back until 3 years, and then by the next movie, it's 3 months. And then by the time we get to the end of the series, it's 3 seconds. In a way, it kind of mirrors how time seems to move faster as a person ages. I would go as far as to say that this element reflects a specific kind of temporal anxiety that James Rolfe articulates as a fundamental truth of getting older. You can see this today, where he constantly stresses time working against him and his output of content on YouTube, to the point where some have even memed on him for it.
There doesn't exist enough time in the year to keep doing a full 31 review marathon, because honestly, I just don't have the time.
Time sucks. Nobody likes time.
It really does seem like this fear of time slipping away has haunted him for his entire life, even when he was a little kid making movies just like this.
There wasn't time to do another take. There wasn't options. You had to shoot it as fast as you could and move on.
It kind of informs you as a viewer of this sense of creative constipation that James Rolfe felt while trying to wrap up the series. In his many commentary tracks that he made with his wonderful mustache, he describes the later films as a weight that he had to drag toward the finish line, trapped by a completionist instinct that wouldn't let him abandon the warlock for the more sophisticated ideas that he was developing in his head. He felt like he was tied down to something that he made years prior and had to finish it because that's just what you do. And again, I'm not trying to play armchair psychologist here by any means, but part of me does feel like that sentiment is still with him today with The Nerd, where you can definitely tell at points he is burnt out and he clearly has bigger and better passion projects that he wants to pursue. But of course, your cash cow is The Nerd, and for him as a kid, the cash cow was Snix. Now that's not a slight at The Nerd or James or anything. Again, this is just a fun little read into who he is as a person through his early work. Finishing the final film at 18 years old became like a necessary exorcism for James, because it allowed him to dump the accumulated baggage of his childhood filmography so he could start over with a clean slate.
In the movies, my character is always being haunted by Snix and wants to be rid of him. In the same way, the series haunted me. They were like a burden. I wanted to get them done so I can move on to the next movies.
You can watch him physically grow up across the 6 entries, moving from a kid playing with a camcorder to a young man mastering VCR editing and complex continuity. The Warlock became a fixed point that allowed him to measure his own evolution, proving that the struggle to finish a project is often more revealing than the project itself, which is sort of going to be the crux of this entire video. When everything is all said and done, he walked away from the series, not because he still cared about the plot, he clearly didn't, but because he had finally outgrown the person who needed to tell this story. If you're interested in hearing more about these movies in a very in-depth manner, then I would recommend taking a look at a podcast by Red Cow Arcade and Hat Hole Home Video, where they go extremely in-depth on each installment in an almost procedural manner. It's a great video.
It was just an ordinary hot weekend in May 1996. I had nothing to do. I was bored out of my mind. I was just sitting in my room listening to the droning sounds of lawnmowers. And then I decided to get up and do something. The result, a night of total terror.
1996's A Night of Total Terror is one of James's, I would say, most important films. Now, one of my personal favorite videos on the entire Cinemassacre channel is this making of video where James dives into the process of making this movie during his summer break when he was just a teenager. You can tell that this particular project holds a special place in his heart, as there's an undeniable sense of care and thought that went into every aspect of it. The whole movie serves as a tribute to silent horror films from the 1910s and the 1920s, a genre that, if you know anything about James, you know he has an immense passion for. His palpable love for silent horror bleeds into every frame. Throughout the film, you can see little nods to those classic movies with their eerie atmosphere and expressionistic visuals. But let's be honest here, the pacing is mind-numbingly slow to the point of being almost painfully boring at times. Luckily, there's a 2006 re-edit that trims the original 30-minute runtime down to a much more digestible 3 minutes. The fact that the movie still makes complete sense in its abbreviated form is pretty telling about how much excess filler there was in the original cut. Again, despite its flaws, the movie has some genuinely interesting moments. It's clear that even in these early efforts, James was beginning to find his creative voice. Sure, the pacing is rough, but you can see flashes of his potential as a filmmaker. The black and white cinematography, for example, works surprisingly well. It lends the whole thing an eerie, nostalgic quality that's kind of fitting for a silent film homage, even if it is an amateur effort made by a teenager shot on VHS. But that analog damage and grain, I think, adds a lot to it. Again, this is going to sound wild and a total reach, but there are some moments here that honestly remind me of some of the later entries in the Mandela catalog. Maybe that's just because it's an analog, black and white film, but I mean, come on. Now, on the other hand, much like the Six Snix Flix, this film is mostly unwatchable. Again, I'm sorry. The visuals are cool, but buried within this unpolished exterior are some fascinating glimpses of the filmmaker that James would become.
Now, prepare yourself. A night of total terror.
1999's The Head Incident is a fragmented supernatural procedural where two patients describe a shared delusion of a murderous disembodied head and a mysterious figure in black. It operates as a nesting doll of narratives, jumping from psychiatric evaluations into the actual events within a dilapidated house, eventually folding back on itself to reveal that the doctors are just as susceptible to the infection as the victims. The reliance on a literal dummy head and a masked antagonist really shows that James is someone who prioritizes the physical presence of a monster over your traditional character development, where, I don't know, the monster represents grief, a la A24 movies. Instead, I see a direct lineage here from the practical effects of universal horror and the slasher boom of the 80s, where the primary goal is the construction of a tangible scare, using whatever household props or local locations are within reach. Whether intentional or not, I think The Head Incident reveals a filmmaker who views filmmaking as a way to physically manifest a nightmare, focusing on the craftsmanship of the monster as opposed to trying to modernize the genre or deconstruct anything for a contemporary audience. This is just James making a flat-out horror movie, and I love it for that. As a big Cinemassacre fan, I can appreciate James's work in context, but this one, like the other ones that I've talked about already, definitely has its issues. The acting is really bad, and again, that's expected for something made by high schoolers, but I do think that the visuals are where the head incident shines its brightest. Despite the rough edges, there's genuinely impressive imagery here, and you can tell James is really starting to find himself as a filmmaker, even at just 19 years old. It's clear where his influences are coming from, but it still feels like a big leap forward for him. This is also where we kind of get that ever-present theme in his work of an inanimate object going after people and trying to murder them.
It's okay. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to suck on your balls.
We saw this, of course, with Mr. Bucket in Board James, and in the countless instances throughout the AVGN series, whether it be Ernie or Rob the Robot. So to see it pop up here so early on in his filmmaking career, it's kind of funny. While it might not hold up as one of his best works, The Head Incident is still worth a look if you're interested in seeing his evolution as a creator. Otherwise, stay away, it's not really worth your time. 21 years later, James released The Head Returns as a sequel to the original film. The plot follows a psychiatrist who has spent 20 years locked in an asylum after being terrorized by a floating murderous ventriloquist dummy head. He is finally released only to realize that the Man in Black and the Head have returned, forcing him to confront the trauma he's been obsessed with for 2 decades. This project is so fascinating despite being a green screen nightmare. It really says a lot about who James is as a person. I think most people view their childhood home movies as cringy relics that should never, ever see the light of day. I mean, I definitely feel that way about my own projects, but James treats them as a legitimate part of his filmography. By making The Head Returns as an adult who is married and has kids, he is retroactively turning a backyard hobby from when he was 19 into a legitimized film franchise. He gives the original 1999 footage the same reverence that a professional director might show a classic studio debut. He wants to tell the world that those early efforts were the start of a serious career, as opposed to just a bunch of friends messing around. Now, this mindset is all over Cinemassacre 200, which is one of my favorite videos that he's ever made, where he catalogs hundreds of recordings ranging from elaborate shorts to just childhood clips. And in that video, he gives all of them film numbers. He labels a video of himself playing with toys as a film. And that can come off as cringy, but it only adds to how compelling he is as a creator, since he refuses to see his past as a series of unrelated home videos. Rather, it's the literal DNA that got him to where he is today. Again, at this point, I'm doing nothing but playing armchair psychiatrist here. I mean, this is me overanalyzing his movies. I think it's clear that he has this need for validation, and it seems to come from a desire for order. James values the time that he spent on those early projects and hates the idea of them being dismissed just because they were shot on a cheap camcorder. When he revisits these stories now, he applies better lighting and more complex scripts to the same basic ideas that he was exploring as a kid. He is asserting that the vision was always there. Those movies are real movies, even when the gear was lacking. In short, this entire project to me reads as James connecting the dots of his life to ensure that nothing he ever created is lost or seen as a one-off mistake.
Until sleep tonight, wearing any
until
makeup.
4 a.m.
I'm gonna sleep for like 5 hours. Makeup.
2001's Cinemaphobia follows a protagonist who finds his physical reality eroding under the weight of cinematic tropes, beginning with the sudden appearance of boom mics and phantom film crews in his peripheral vision. He experiences a total breakdown of the private sphere, where a simple dinner of pizza is forced into a dramatic multi-angle sequence, and his own clothing spontaneously acquires the calculated grime of a wardrobe department. By the time he finds himself physically trapped within the literal frame of the image, the film has transitioned from a quirky character study into a claustrophobic horror piece about a man losing his autonomy to a medium that he no longer controls. This movie is so fascinating, and I think this is where we get to the point where his movies are actually watchable now, and they're actually quality. This movie specifically operates as a sharp satire of the specific frustrations inherent to independent horror production. Rolfe inserts a movie within a movie titled Zombie Slayer 2 to mock the aesthetic failures of the genre, highlighting the amateurish acting and the constant technical blunders that plague sets with no budget.
The sun's going to be going down soon, and we don't have enough time to set up another scene, so let's just call it a night. We'll be here usual time, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Rolfe uses this premise to explore a genuine sensory overload caused by obsessive media consumption and creation. The protagonist suffers because he has lost the ability to exist in a world that isn't being recorded, staged, or edited for an invisible audience. As a content creator myself, I definitely related to that, where every little thing I do might have the opportunity to be content, and I can just film it and then release it as a video. And this is 2001, this is before YouTube. He was really ahead of his time with this commentary. Cinemaphobia suggests that once you begin to view your daily life through the structural requirements of a script, the authentic self disappears entirely. The horror of the finale lies in the realization that there is no off switch for this perspective, as he becomes a permanent resident of the celluloid, proving that a life lived entirely through the lens eventually turns the person into nothing more than a prop. And I feel like I just have to mention this, but we again get an inanimate object coming to life and going after the protagonist. Again. 2001's It Came from the Toilet might not sound like an essential entry in film history, but it's what I consider to be the true foundation of the poop-centric humor that would later define the angry video game nerd series. Long before he would ever take a dump on Bugs Bunny's head, there was this charmingly crude short. It stars a very young Mike Matei who finds himself face to face with a literal turd monster. That's the plot. That's the whole movie. But I think what makes this movie more than just a juvenile gag is the way that the monster's grotesque movements take on an almost absurdist life of their own. There's one sequence where the creature seeps out of the bathroom and begins to fill the hallway of the apartment building, not unlike that famous scene from The Blob. It's almost surreal watching this slimy mess spread across the floor, a parody of a classic 1950s creature feature that's as gross as it is oddly mesmerizing. And it's like, this is literally poop. That's the joke. But my favorite moment from this entire short film is the very creative shot where the turd appears to climb up the side of a building. I didn't think those were words I would ever say in a video, but here we are. You do realize that it's just a trick of the camera where it's filmed upside down and it's actually just moving down and then they flip. Whatever, you get it. It's low budget filmmaking at its finest, where imagination trumps any and all resources. And you can't help but admire the DIY spirit of it all. One thing that really elevates this short is the fact that it was shot on 16mm film. Now, in today's digital world, that might not seem like a big deal, but there's something about shooting on film that gives even the most absurd content an extra layer of significance. Film has a way of making even the most ridiculous ideas feel a little more important, like they're part of some underground cult cinema legacy, and maybe in its own strange way, It Came from the Toilet is exactly that. Personally, I love watching movies shot on film, even if it's as ridiculous as this. So going from all this digital cinematography to something as fantastic as 16mm film, I'll take what I can get.
The adventures of this rebel have only begun. He still has the rest of the universe to explore in his never-ending journey to boldly go where no alien kung fu werewolf has gone before.
Kung Fu Werewolf from Outer Space is exactly what the title says. It's a 26-minute-long martial arts horror mashup that James made during a college winter break in 2001. The story follows a lonely gay sensei who is an outcast in his small town. He eventually finds an alien to train in Kung Fu, but the alien is then bitten by a werewolf, leading to a series of low-budget fight scenes. It ends with the alien returning to space as a martial arts master werewolf hybrid, while the sensei gives up karate to join the circus. It's basically a kitchen sink movie. He liked Kung Fu, werewolves, and he liked the idea of sci-fi, so he put them all in a blender to see if they'd stick. And it weirdly works for the most part. This movie functions as a direct roadmap for the creative habits that Rolfe developed throughout his career. He approached the absurd premise of an alien werewolf learning karate with a total lack of irony. There's this level of sincerity that I just really appreciate, and I think that same tone carries over to the angry video game nerd. Something else I've noticed is that a lot of his protagonists consistently appear as isolated eccentrics who remain misunderstood by their surrounding society. The sensei character fits this archetype by living as a hermit who only finds connection through niche interests. It just makes you wonder if he's really speaking from the heart there, and he relates to a lot of his characters in that way, especially as we move into the next couple films where you see a lot more of James and the films keep getting better and better. In 2003's Curse of the Cat Lover's Grave, a young man wanders out to a pet cemetery to pay his respects, but things go south once he starts poking around the property. He runs into a creepy figure with a shovel and ends up trapped in a basement where the vibe goes from an unsettling chiller to a flat-out gory splatter flick. When watching this film, and especially listening to the commentary track from its director, James comes across as the kind of guy who will make a movie happen even if the world is actively trying to stop him. He's the clear ringleader, and you can tell his friends are willing to go through hell or high water just to make his vision seen.
If he would have been stabbed in that shirt, the shirt would have been all bloody and then useless, and we needed the shirt still for another scene. So we're like, okay, how about he just takes the shirt off for no apparent reason? Your eyes look tired.
But it's so great. It's like Bruce Lee, like, dude.
Yeah.
That's fucking great.
And Gary's every expression Gary makes, look at that. It's like,
I like that. That's the most asinine one to do.
it's like you're like the best at bad acting.
Oh, thank you.
I found myself really liking this movie because it showcases his creative process as a wild mix of careful planning and total improvisation. He's a massive fan of the happy accident. If an actor accidentally falls and hurts themselves, James just keeps the camera rolling and puts it in the movie because he wants the footage to feel real, even if the plot is ridiculous.
Oh, by the way, what's really interesting, the grounds that this was shot on was actually a pet cemetery at one time. Everybody in the neighborhood used to bury all their dead pets back there.
It smelled like it. It smelled like fucking manure. That's what it smelled like.
This movie was actually shot on 16mm film. Again, much like it came from the toilet, which is a rarity for James, I should state. This isn't really the standard. James is someone who has been a very early champion of shooting on digital. In fact, he did shoot some of this on digital because he had a second camera operating as a backup in case anything happened to the 16mm film.
Yeah, and this was shot on film, 16mm, but 400 feet came back black. Remember the day when we looked at that? Like, it was just like,
I think
black.
we just looked at that film and it was black, but luckily, you didn't trust film at all. You know, you just went straight with the video.
Yeah, I shot video as well as film. Yeah.
Film was a total piece of shit, right?
This is a genuinely impressive student film. I actually hadn't ever seen it before prior to marathoning all of these, but there's a lot to love. James actively leans more into the humor near the third act, and I just can't help but think about AVGN, especially the horror comedy Halloween specials. In 2004's Legend of the Blue Hole, a college student named Jason becomes obsessed with a local urban legend about a supposedly bottomless pool in the New Jersey Pine Barrens. After a classroom presentation where he's mocked for his interest in UFOs and the paranormal, he visits a strange antique shop and meets an old man who gives him a map to the Blue Hole. Despite warnings and his own growing dread, Jason treks into the woods, crosses a freezing river, and finally finds the pool. The story takes a Twilight Zone-style twist when Jason is pulled into the water only to wake up decades in the past, realizing he is destined to become the old man who sends his younger self to the hole, trapping him in an endless time loop. The commentary track for this movie is really funny because James just sounds like he is so relieved to be done with this project.
Hello, I'm James Rolfe, and this was my senior film for college. I haven't really distanced myself from it yet, so right now I'm honestly kind of sick of looking at it because I just worked my brains out and I just graduated. Alright.
He uses this movie to deal with a genuine phobia of deep water, which makes the whole thing feel more like a personal therapy session than a school assignment. He's clearly felt like the odd one out for a long time. We see this in his movies, where the protagonist is very frequently a loner.
My friend Gina from Boston was visiting the South Jersey area near where I live,
And she gave me a spontaneous call one day and said she was looking for this place called the Blue Hole. I never heard of it, so she told me what it was. And I was at work at the time, so I couldn't join her, but I gave her a call that night and she didn't answer her cell phone. In fact, I never heard from her again for another 2 weeks, and I was actually pretty scared for a moment that, she could have died back there. So I did a bunch of research on the place and I went searching for it to see if it was real. And I actually had nightmares too, so of course there's a nightmare scene in the movie.
James shot this movie on a Panasonic DVX-100, which was the first affordable camera to mimic the 24 frames per second look of film. This is the same camera model that was used to shoot the first couple seasons of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, as well as 2005's The Puffy Chair. 2005's The Deader the Better is, in my opinion, the best short film that James has ever made. The premise is super simple. It follows two cemetery workers, Lloyd and Earl, who spend every night dispatching the undead rising from their graves.
I'll get it when I'm finished with this.
You better do it before the brains dry. They're all over the tombstone.
Lloyd is the veteran who views the work with a detached, brutal sense of perspective, while Earl is the more sensitive newcomer struggling with the lack of respect shown to the corpses. Their ideological clash over whether to treat the bodies with dignity or as garbage is interrupted when a massive wave of zombies forces them to stop arguing and start fighting. After clearing the initial surge, they retreat to a tool shed to gear up for a final stand. The film ends with a cynical monologue about the monotony of their existence, punctuated by a final comedic kill where Lloyd uses a car's power window to decapitate a zombie. James uses this 2005 short to plant a flag in the world of practical effects and digital effects. It operates with a palpable reverence for the tactile splatter found in early Sam Raimi or Peter Jackson films. Every exploding head and blood-soaked tombstone feels like a deliberate rejection of the digital polish that was starting to take over independent horror at the time. He focuses heavily on the mechanics of the gore, showing a filmmaker who finds more satisfaction in the engineering of a physical blood rig than in complex camera movements. But at the same time, the film is black and white, and the blood is red. He used digital effects to achieve that look. So it's interesting that while he obviously loves practical effects, he still uses digital CGI to really make them pop more and enhance those effects. I also really like how James approaches the zombie genre through the lens of a blue-collar worker, which I think grounds the supernatural absurdity in a very cynical way, but it works. I love how the banter between Lloyd and Earl has this worldview around it where this job is just so mundane, and yet they're killing the undead.
Just destroy the brain and bring them down in the most efficient manner.
I think I made pretty efficient work of that last one. If you get off your skinny ass and go take a look.
Honestly, this perspective feels personal to James. It shows the burnout that he clearly was dealing with of being a video editor in the mid-2000s, spending long work hours in pure isolation. In his book, The Movie Making Nerd, he talked a lot about how he was editing safety videos, and it wasn't exactly the best job for him. I'm sure at this time, he wanted to reflect that. He was very likely working around blue-collar guys and wanted to make a movie that took that type of personality and put them in something he loves, like a zombie movie. Overall, I am very impressed by this short film, and I just think that the sheer work ethic alone to pull off this mess of practical effects on a DIY budget should be commended. Like I said, I think it's one of his best. I really do.
You didn't need to hit him so many times.
I only hit it once. There wasn't even anything left for a second hit.
2010's The Dragon in My Dreams feels like the closest we've ever gotten to the real James Rolfe. It's a quiet, reflective documentary filmed as he approached age 30, following him on a search for the physical source of his earliest memories. Spurred on by a recurring childhood nightmare, James tracks down the New Jersey park where a specific dragon-shaped sprinkler once stood. It terrified him as a kid, and now, as an adult, in a stroke of pure cinematic luck, he arrives on the very day the playground is being demolished, finding the fiberglass beast sitting discarded in the dirt. This movie is so telling as to who James Rolfe is as a person. It captures his unique internal logic with the perspective of someone who, in the best way possible, never really outgrew his childhood bedroom. I know. Rich coming from me. You see, at this point in his life, he had reached the milestone of having made 300 films, which seems to have triggered a loop in his creative brain. It sent him on a hunt for a literal landmark of his toddler-era fears. To James, his career isn't some corporate ladder or a path to professional growth, but rather a lifelong attempt to master the same monsters that kept him awake as a kid. Even if you look at AVGN, he views the world with a sort of sentimental animism, treating a piece of rusted playground equipment like a spiritual collaborator that gave him his entire visual language, or an NES cartridge that he would go on to use to build an entire career out of. And at this point in time, he had been doing the nerd for around, I want to say, 6 years. His relentless output of content, especially at this point in time, comes across as a form of self-directed therapy. Whether he was using audio cassettes or photo albums, the camera always acted as a shield, helping him put horror into perspective.
It's time to say goodbye to the past. Time to move forward and create those movies of my dreams. Because dreams are where it all started.
4 years after the release of The Dragon in My Dreams, James would finally reach his ultimate filmmaking milestone with the release of the Angry Video Game Nerd movie. However, a project of that scale, from its crowdfunding roots to its Hollywood production, truly deserves a video of its own. I should mention that this film has notoriously been a copyright magnet on YouTube, so when I do tackle it, I'll have to be pretty creative with how I show clips to keep the channel safe. Beyond the feature film, there is still the massive, sprawling catalog of the Angry Video Game Nerd episodes, the annual tradition of Monster Madness, and the interconnected lore of Board James, all of which I could totally see myself covering in the future in their own retrospective videos. So, if that interests you, let me know down below in the comments and subscribe. And with all that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. Big thank you to channel members for making videos like these possible. For $1.99 a month, you can see select videos early and get access to past VODs and exclusive videos, as well as an entry to the Discord server. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.